Well, happy Friday to everybody. It is the weekend. It has come again, and Sunday is not far away. And we've been looking in the book of Hebrews. If you've been joining in, we've been in the book of Hebrews on Fridays, really trying to focus on what the Hebrews writer was teaching about Jesus and about living for Jesus. And we were talking about recently from chapter 12, after the Hebrews writer gave many examples of faith in chapter 11, and then the ultimate example of faithfulness, that of Jesus at the beginning of chapter 12. And then he talked about last time, or we talked about the discipline, the training and the discipline of God, and how we're to learn and grow from the trials and temptations that we face, to continue to learn and to mature, grow stronger, grow more strong in our faith, and our hope, and our faithfulness, and determination, endurance. Well, then he goes on, we're going to pick up today in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 18, and see what the Hebrews writer told them next, after talking about how they need to accept the training of God and to continue to grow. He then reminds them in verse 18, he says, "For we have not come to the mountain that may be touched physically, and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest." Talking about that day, if you remember, in Exodus, that when Israel came to Mount Sinai and God's presence came on it with all of these things, fire and blackness and smoke and darkness and tempest, and you couldn't touch the mountain or you'd have to be put to death. And they were afraid of that. The sound of a great trumpet, verse 19, the voice of words, God's voice, so that those who heard God's voice begged that the words should not be spoken to them anymore, for they could not endure what was commanded, that even if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, "I am exceedingly afraid and trembling." You know, the Hebrews writer says, listen, we haven't come to a situation like that. Our situation isn't like that anymore, where we are withdrawn from God. We're separated from God. This fear and darkness and power and all these things, that's not to say God doesn't have that power and glory anymore. But I think he's playing on this idea that we have not come to this physical mountain with fear and terror, but instead, he says, we have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. We have come to the spiritual mountain of God, the spiritual heavenly city of God, the heavenly Jerusalem. He goes on to say that we have come to an innumerable company of angels, so many, to the general assembly or the festal gathering and the church of the firstborn ones who are registered in heaven. We are considered the firstborn ones of God. Our names are registered in heaven. We have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect. We have come to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. We have come to Mount Zion, a spiritual mountain, a spiritual city, the spiritual nation of God, the heavenly citizenship that God has given us. And they needed to hope in that and be comforted and encouraged by that. And so do we. We need to be comforted and encouraged by knowing this, that we have come to God. We are part of the heavenly city of God, the new Jerusalem, in the new covenant. We have the birthright of firstborn, the inheritance, that blessing through Jesus. We have come to Jesus, who is our mediator of the new covenant, and his blood that we have been saved by. He reminds them of that. But then he goes on to say that God has spoken, just like God spoke on Mount Sinai. And God has spoken now through his Son, Hebrews chapter 1. And so he goes on to say, though, see that you do not refuse him who speaks, God, Jesus. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now God has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Now this yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. God says there's coming a day when he is going to shake and destroy all earthly things. And then all that is going to remain in eternity is the spiritual kingdom of God. And that's the hope we have. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us have grace and thankfulness, by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, being thankful to God for the hope we have, the unshakable, eternal, spiritual kingdom that we are going to get to be in heaven for in eternity with him. Therefore, let's be thankful and serve God with reverence and awe and godly fear. Because, verse 29, he does remind us, we are to fear God. His point earlier about how we've not come to the Mount Sinai and the fear and all of that, we've come to Zion, was not that we stopped fearing God. But it's a reminder of what God has made possible for us in Jesus to come to God. But remember, if we refuse, if we disobey, our God is a consuming fire. And his whole point is if we refuse to listen to God, if we refuse to come to him, if we refuse to be saved by Jesus and come have that hope of an eternal kingdom, if we refuse to live for him, then we will be consumed by the wrath and fire of God. God doesn't want that, though. God sent his Son to save us, to give us this hope, so that we could be in his eternal kingdom. So what we need to do every day, and then on Sunday when we come together to remember Jesus in the Lord's Supper, to remember what Jesus has made possible. We have come to Mount Zion. We have come to God, to Jesus, his presence. We have heard the voice of God through his word. And we have believed and obeyed and been saved. We need to continue to believe and obey, and to encourage those who have not to do it before it's too late. Let's think on these things. Think about what Jesus has made possible for us. And thanks be to God that we have come to Mount Zion and have that heavenly hope. God bless.